We finally reached the end of Genshin version 3, and I realized that in the midst of all the excitement for Fontaine, I also feel relief? Sumeru gave us exciting new gameplay to experience, stunning landscapes to explore, and fascinating secrets to discover. Many of the quests have turned out to be the most impactful and emotional in the game for me, many of the characters introduced have been instant favorites, and Nahida in particular just completely stole my heart. So why am I feeling this way? After all that promise, why do I feel a sense of disappointment? Let's start with a recap of what I personally felt were the highlights and flaws of each patch before taking a look at my overall thoughts. Remember, this will all be very subjective. I'd love to hear about your experiences too. Sumeru's release in version 3.0 was amazing. Everything was new and exciting, and I spent countless hours exploring the beautiful rainforest, listening to the stunning music, and just existing in this gorgeous, gorgeous world. Genshin's world design has always been a strong point, and I felt like Hoyo had kicked it up a notch. The new traversal methods scattered all over the place were a great addition, noticeably more convenient than the ones in previous regions, and there was always something to spark your interest around every corner. After the somewhat bleak and hostile tones of Inazuma, Sumeru felt bursting with vitality and life, which was a welcome contrast. The Aranara in particular were adorable, and I loved uncovering their hidden world. When it comes to gameplay, by far the most impactful feature, which came with Sumeru, was Dendro. It felt much more complicated than the other elements, perhaps a little too complicated at first, but after getting the hang of it, it turned out to be a great addition. Some characters who had previously felt underwhelming suddenly became powerful, many who had previously been great were also viable in new and interesting playstyles, and yet the popular characters from the previous versions somehow remained just as strong. Hoyo did a brilliant job of threading the needle of avoiding power creep without making the new features feel underwhelming. A year on, I remain very impressed with Dendro. The playable characters released in the first patch were also a mixed bag for me. I loved Collei from the start, but disliked Tighnari's character and skipped his banner completely, and was a bit put off by Dori, though my feelings towards those two have dramatically changed in recent months. Dendro Traveler quickly became one of my favorite variations though, and it was nice to actually get some use out of her for once. The Sumeru Archon Quest arc got off to a great start, and felt like the beginning of a much more fleshed out and subtle story than in previous regions. Something about the way the cast interacted with each other felt more real and vibrant than previously, and while the characters we met were of varying levels of interest to me, they all felt like they had an important part to play. The Samsara Loop story was a bit much though, and being stuck in it for 2 hours was awful, especially since I had no idea when I started it how long it would take. Those downsides to the quest felt minor though, and all was forgotten when I got to meet Nahida. Up until then, I didn't really have a favorite Genshin character, but Nahida absolutely stole my soul. The story was left at a cliffhanger, which worked really well for me, and overall this patch was just fantastic. The first desert region swiftly followed in version 3.1, which was exciting and beautiful in its own way. The area felt vast, and the hidden ruins sunken beneath the sands were enticing. The first flickers of frustration started to take hold here. All I wanted to do was explore, but the game kept blocking access to the new areas, an annoying trend we'll get back to shortly. 3 characters were added in 3.1, Cyno, Candace, and Nilo. I instantly loved Candace and Cyno aesthetically, and Cyno's personality was a clear winner. I loved his dad jokes and the deadpan way he delivers them, and the exasperated way other characters react to him. Many people find him a little bit grating, but for me, he's a smash hit. I pulled for both instantly and got to leveling them. Now, if you've watched my videos on Cyno, you'll know I went through a bit of a roller coaster with my feelings towards his gameplay, but I'm glad to say I got it figured out in the end, and any temporary feelings of regret got washed away. Nilo, on the other hand, while I enjoyed her playstyle, her character in the story felt so unbelievably bland that I wasn't even tempted to pull for her, despite her being one of the most overpowered characters in the game. I also skipped her rerun, and I haven't regretted it. Despite how good she is, she simply isn't for me. The Archon quests in this patch were decent, but didn't really stick in my memory all that much. I remember mixed feelings from enjoying Candace and Cyno, while at the same time being a little impatient since it felt like a side story. Really, I just wanted to get back to the main story and rescue Nahida. It was good to see the desert people's perspective on the city folk as Sumeru though, since it cast them in a very different light. The world quests though, I feel like I already in 3.1 started feeling like the quest quests were sprawling chains of filler which seem to have no end, especially in the desert region. A lot of areas are blocked off until you progressed far enough in certain quests, and I guess I was one of the unlucky ones who accidentally started multiple quests and did them in somewhat out of order, which led to a lot of backtracking and looking up which quest lines to complete. The underground was a disorienting maze, and while delving through ancient ruins and searching for lost treasures sounds brilliant in theory, in this case it had some serious problems which soured the experience a fair bit. The locked doors coupled with the lack of underground maps just made it feel frustrating at times. Every tunnel seemed to lead to a dead end, and when you finally slogged through the right quest to obtain the appropriate clearance, it was a nightmare to retrace your steps and find out what was behind that door. This was also before teleports had a special map marker showing whether they're above or below ground, which further complicated things. Overall, I was still enjoying Sumeru, but those flaws were definitely getting in the way. Version 3.2 outshone any negative feelings though, because it brought my absolute favorite Genshin character, Nahida. Link in the description on my full thoughts on why she's the best character in the game, for me at least. The other character released in this patch, Layla, also quickly became a favorite. With this version, I was ready and raring to go finish the Archon quest. Finally, it was time to rescue Nahida and save Sumeru once and for all. The quest did not disappoint. It still has its rough edges and would benefit from having the word count halved in places, but for me, this is the point where Genshin's narrative graduated from being a decent story with mediocre storytelling to being a fantastic story told quite well. The narrative does a great job of pulling together the different threads from the early Sumeru arc, and built up to an epic new boss fight against the giant mecha-wielding Balladeer, which has quickly become my favorite out of all the weekly bosses to revisit, and is particularly fun in co-op mode. But nothing will ever quite top the climactic scene. Nahida's arc was incredibly satisfying, starting from a place of crippling self-doubt, which I can relate to all too well, ending with her conquering her inner demons and earning her self-worth, only for her to have to give up the one thing she truly wanted in order to save the world. That scene with her letting go of the memory of the one person she hoped would be her mentor is truly heart-wrenching, and is one of my favorite moments in storytelling from any medium. Everything else in this version pales in comparison to the Archon quest, so it's surprising looking back that it did include a couple of events I enjoyed a lot. The original Fungi Pokemon event was great, I even have a Bongo Head plushie, and the Hypostasis Symphony was a fun challenge, but the Archon quest was so impactful that it overshadows the rest of the patch. This was definitely the high point of version 3 for me, if not the entire game so far. Version 3.3 definitely felt a little diminished in contrast. The Archon quest felt much less impactful, which is only to be expected after such an emotional climax to the main story, but this was very much exacerbated by Hoya once again using way too many words. I'll always be happy to spend more time with Nahida, but I'm generally not much of a fan of Scaramouche. Speaking of whom, he was finally released as a playable character in his guise as the Wanderer. In the trials, his gameplay seemed fun enough, but I was only mildly tempted to pull for him, and as with Nilo, I haven't regretted saving my Primo Gems. Farazan was also released, and I was put off by her abrasive and irritating character at first. I loved her aesthetic, aside from her weird hairstyle, which looks like someone got bubblegum stuck in the back and therefore hacked it apart. And her playstyle is very fun, but at first I was happy to skip. On the plus side, this version had a couple of entertaining events. Wind Trace returned, which is always good fun, but the real highlight for me was the Akitsu Kimodameshi event. The quest for this event was decent, but the part I really enjoyed was the Breakout minigame, which was fun enough in single player but was absolutely hilarious in co-op. Overall, this patch felt fairly forgettable, just a little bit of filler after the excitement of the main Archon quest finale. Version 3.4 felt more packed with content, though it did have its own downsides. The highlights for me were the two new characters, Alhaitham and Yao. I had been hoping to skip Alhaitham to save Primos, but since I had enjoyed his personality in the quests so far and loved his aesthetics, that would have been dependent on me disliking his playstyle. So of course I absolutely loved it and had no choice but to pull. He's one of my most powerful characters and does a brilliant job in the Abyss, so no regrets there. The other new character was Yao. She had been teased in some artwork long before her appearance, and had always always thought she looked absolutely adorable. She's a fantastic healer and I love her personality too, and she's become yet another one of my favorites. The events were once again usual mixed bag. Lantern Ride is always good, especially with the free 4-star. The Beetle Brawl was okay, though it was a little odd to see Ito take less of the spotlight than expected, and the actual gameplay was a little lackluster after so much build-up. I did love the 2 new outfits for Lisa and Ayaka though. Ayaka's made me excited for Fontaine even back then. The main attraction of this version should have been the new area, but since it was yet more desert, I wasn't that excited, particularly since it came with more endless quests focusing on side characters I didn't really care for. I still went through and explored as much as I could, but the desert had definitely lost its novelty value at this point. I was starting to feel a little tired of it. Version 3.5 brought the Windbloom event, which really surprised me. It was by far my favorite event story up to that point. I was so engaged in it that I didn't skip a single line of dialogue. The character interactions were so well done, and it's just like the whole world came alive, with all the different relationships taking on a life of their own. It managed to avoid the dialogue bloat, which plagues so much of Genshin's content, and the minigames were fun. Rhythm games be damned. Dea and Mika were both released in this patch to much controversy. I was happy to skip since I wasn't a huge fan of Dea, but still very disappointing to see the sheer number of problems with her kit, especially since she was a favorite of so many people. The main quest introduced this version was Carrybird. A great story overall, but one which again highlights a frustrating problem with many Genshin quests. The moment you start it, it locks you in and prevents you from teleporting or doing anything else, which is a big nope for me. And as a result, I skipped huge parts of the story and dialogue in an effort to get out of the lock state ASAP. I wish Hoya would either stop doing this entirely or put up a confirmation before locking us in, which states how long a quest will take, and lets us cancel starting it and return at another time when we can properly focus on it. Aside from the wonderful surprise that was Windbloom, throughout this patch I was feeling fairly burnt out from all the long quests, and actually started to fall behind on content, particularly the character story quests and world quests. Version 3.6 took the ups and downs to new levels. Again, the main event, Parade of Provenance, was absolute joy, with wonderful interactions between the Sumeru cast, which made them feel even more like a dynamic community with several groups of friends with their own internal worlds and shared history. The gameplay was fun as well, though my favorite thing has to be Carver's hilarious interactions with the Desert Foxes. Both Baizu and Carver were released in this version, which was a whole ordeal for me. I desperately wanted Carver because of how much I loved his design and character, but it took all of my saved Primo gems to get him. Even though that was only 100 pulls or so, I got 3 copies of Baizu in that time, despite not being particularly fussed about getting him either. I think I've officially learned my lesson to never wish for a 4-star. This was only made worse by how much of a disappointment Carver's gameplay has been. He's the first character who I really wanted to enjoy, whose kit has let me down like this. Coupled with his refusal to come home, I'm still a little salty about this, but I love his character so much that I have no choice but to forgive. In contrast, Baizu has been an unexpected favorite of mine. I was all set to dislike him due to his initial perceived mistreatment of Gigi, but his gameplay is surprisingly fun and his backstory is actually legitimately moving, though I only know that through watching someone else do his quest. The reason for that is that this patch is really where my quest burnout took hold. Baizu's story quest is so good that my partner gladly played through it twice, but I just haven't had the energy. I also haven't even gotten around to Nahida's second story quest despite her being my favorite character. Even worse, by this point I had lost my motivation to explore. 3.6 included yet another desert area, and it's just been too much for me. This is the only region in the game which I have left at less than 100% complete. Exploration is my favorite thing, and it's the whole reason I got hooked by Genshin in the first place, so for me to leave that untouched is really telling. Version 3.7 and 8 have kind of passed in a blur. Kirara's release was a bright spot. I was lucky to get her very easily, and she's been super fun to play with. I didn't particularly care for most of the events in these two versions, aside from some fighty sections. One exception is the Klee Summer event, which has been absolutely adorable. Though even there I've still got a fair bit left to do with less than a week remaining due to the quest dialogue burnout. At this point I only really log in to do dailies and burn resin, and tend to finish each event at the very last minute. Overall, Sumeru started off really strong, and its high points are up there as some of my favorite gaming moments of all time. The Archon quests were noticeably better than previous versions, since they were given time to breathe and different threads were woven together more effectively than before, and the characters from this region felt like a real living community rather than disconnected sequence of isolated individuals. But despite that, the sheer volume of dialogue in the seemingly never-ending world quests, coupled with the quests which lock you in or which lock exploration progress, have resulted in me struggling to keep up with the new content for the first time since starting Genshin. They kept adding new enemies and areas, but the additions didn't have enough variety, so it felt like you were exploring the same area again and again. And the rewards for exploration feel like they got smaller and smaller too. At the same time, they also didn't really add any endgame content, which is always a bit of a disappointment. The TCG doesn't interest me, even though I do enjoy it to some extent on the rare occasions that I find the time, but I really like to see something built on the core combat gameplay, which is different to the Abyss. Plus, they really should make the Divine Ingenuity into a permanent content. I didn't really get into it this time around, but a permanent mode where people can create and share custom domains and fighting challenges, sign me up. Similarly, I hope there would be more quality of life updates. Artifact loadouts, anyone? Hopefully those will come someday, though it's feeling less and less likely as time goes on. Cannot wait for the underground maps to finally be here, just a shame they weren't there when I needed them to help explore the ruins. I think the Aranara are a perfect microcosm of the problems I had with Sumeru. They started off magical and wonderful, their endless quests and exploration blockers quickly became annoying, their story had an emotional climax, and then they eventually devolved into a chore when trying to collect the ones left behind. And then, after you interact with each Aranara, they leave the world forever, and what's left behind is just a little bit less magical every time. I'm super excited for Fontaine, and I think that points to what went wrong in version 3. They didn't keep it fresh. It would be unreasonable to expect a mountain of perfect content every patch, but if one of the desert regions had been replaced with more forest or an expansion to one of the other 3 nations, I think it would have avoided the slow slide into monotony. Now that we're getting something different, I'm fully expecting my enjoyment to come flooding back, and hopefully they'll start mixing it up again like they did in Inazuma. Sumeru was fantastic overall. It was a big step up compared to previous regions, but with sufficient flaws that I can't help but look back at it and think about what could have been. Let's hope that Hoyo learns from their mistakes, lets us explore freely without being bogged down by quests, and starts cutting down the endless dialogue so that their stories finally have some space to shine. With all that said, if the Archon quest ends up being even half as good as Nahida's story, then I'll forgive them even if they don't. What did you think of Sumeru? I've seen so many different takes on its ups and downs, and so much of it is subjective and depends on your perspective and preferences. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like it, let me know by leaving a like. See you in Fontaine!